St. Patrick's Cathedral held its breath. White lilies crowded the aisle in thick, expensive waves, their sweetness mixing with incense and the faint bite of polished stone. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across 500 faces turned toward the altar. Silk, diamonds, cufflinks, and quiet power sat shoulder to shoulder on red velvet pews, politicians with practiced smiles, business magnates with eyes like calculators, men whose names never appeared on paper but moved the city anyway. Even the organ sounded careful, as if it knew where it was playing. At the front, Nico Fontaine stood beneath the carved arch, a black suit cut so perfectly it looked like armor. His jaw stayed tight, his shoulders still. The gray in his eyes did not match the gold around him. It looked colder, older, empty in a way money could not decorate. Veronica Sterling glided beside him in a gown that caught the light like a blade. French lace, crystal shimmer, a train that seemed to demand the floor surrender to it. Her smile was bright enough to make strangers believe in happy endings. Up close, it had edges. The priest's voice rolled out, slow and solemn, filling the nave. Nico Fontaine, do you take Veronica Sterling to be your lawful wedded wife? A movement cut through the aisle like a thrown stone. A maid in a black uniform broke from the shadows near a pillar, hair loosened, fabric smudged with grime that did not belong in this place. Her canvas shoes struck marble with dull, urgent thuds. People leaned back as she rushed past, a ripple of irritation turning into confusion, then into alarm. Someone hissed, "Who is that?" A security man shifted, hand already sliding under his jacket. The maid did not slow. She reached the altar as if the distance had been burning her lungs, and her hand snapped around Nico Fontaine's wrist. Not a gentle touch, a clamp. Her fingers dug in like she was afraid he would vanish if she let go. Nico's head turned sharply. His expression cracked for the first time, not into warmth but into startled disbelief. "You again?" His voice came out low and dangerous. "What are you doing here?" The maid's green eyes shone wet under the chandelier light. Tears clung there, but the look behind them was not pleading. It was fierce and frightened at once, like someone standing in front of a speeding car. "You're in danger," she said. "Please, 1 minute." Veronica's face changed so fast it looked like a mask being ripped away. Pale first, then flushing into a furious red. "Security," she shrieked. "Drag this lunatic out right now. She's mentally ill." The word mentally ill rang out in the holy space like a slap. Black suits moved in from both sides of the aisle. Shoes scuffed, jackets swayed. A guard's radio clicked once, sharp and impatient. Phones lifted in the pews, their screens blooming like cold little mirrors. The organ faltered. One note held too long, then broke off as if someone had cut the breath out of it. In the sudden quiet, the crowd's murmur swelled, 1,000 whispers scraping against stone. "Audrey," someone breathed, recognizing her. "Fired last night," another voice said, too delighted by scandal. The maid tightened her grip. Nico's wrist jerked, not from her strength, but from the shock of being touched like this in public. His gaze flicked over her uniform, the smears, the trembling in her forearm. His eyes hardened. "Let go," he said. "Now." She did not. "Mr. Fontaine," she whispered, voice rough with panic. "Please listen to me. Just 1 minute." A guard reached for her shoulder. Veronica stepped forward, the crystals on her gown catching light with every furious breath. "You're ruining my wedding," she hissed. "Do you know who you are touching?" The maid's jaw clenched. Her grip stayed locked. Nico's gray eyes narrowed. He could have ended it with a nod. He could have made her disappear before she finished a sentence. He had that kind of power. Everyone here knew it. That knowledge hummed under the chapel's perfume like electricity. And yet, something in her face held him. Not madness, not the wild shine of someone performing for attention. It was fear, real and sharp, aimed past herself, like she was warning him about a fire already behind the curtain. Nico looked at the guards closing in, then back at her hand clamped on his wrist. He felt the eyes of the room pressing in. 500 people waiting to see what kind of man he was today. Veronica's voice went higher. Nico, make them throw her out, right now. The priest stood frozen, hands still lifted, his mouth slightly open, as if the ceremony had slipped into another world. A second guard moved in. Leather gloves creaked as fingers flexed. Nico's gaze stayed on the maid. His voice dropped, flat as steel. You have 10 seconds. Her throat worked. Her chest rose and fell too fast, the fabric at her collar fluttering with every breath. She looked like she had run miles to reach him. She shook her head once, small and desperate. Not here, she said. Not in front of her. Veronica's eyes snapped to the maid, then to Nico, suspicion flashing like a knife. What did you say? The maid pulled. Nico resisted for half a beat out of instinct. Then his feet shifted, dragged one step away from the altar. The movement shocked the room more than the interruption itself. Men who did not startle for gunshots blinked. A woman's hand flew to her mouth. Someone's phone slipped and clattered softly against a pew. Veronica reached for Nico's sleeve. Nico, he lifted one hand. Stop, he said. One word. And the guards halted mid-stride. Their shoulders stayed tense, but they froze the way trained dogs freeze when the hand goes up. Veronica stared at him, stunned. Her lips parted. For a moment, the polished bride disappeared, and something raw stared out through her eyes. Nico did not look at her. He looked at the maid. 1 minute, he said. If you waste it, you're done. The maid swallowed hard, then yanked him toward the coat room beside the altar. A heavy oak door tucked into the stone like an afterthought. Her grip did not soften. It was the grip of someone who had already decided the price was worth paying. They moved fast. Nico's shoes struck marble with controlled, angry steps. The maid's canvas shoes slipped once, caught, kept going. Behind them, the cathedral's hush turned into a living thing. Whispers rolled through the pews like waves. Questions, accusations. Bets placed in low voices. Veronica stood rigid in the center aisle, her bouquet trembling in her hands. The lilies around her looked suddenly too white, too innocent for the poison in her stare. She took one step forward, then stopped as if an invisible line had been drawn. The coat room door swung open. The maid shoved Nico inside. The door slammed shut with a deep, final sound that made the chandeliers tremble. A lock clicked. Outside, 500 guests stared at the closed oak door as if it had swallowed the future. And for the first time all morning, Veronica Sterling's smile did not return. The coat room was too small for the air they dragged in with them. A single lamp hung from the ceiling, its yellow glow catching dust motes as they drifted through the narrow space. Old velvet coats pressed close on wooden hangers, releasing the tired smell of wool and cologne that had soaked in over years. The oak door shuddered once from the impact of bodies outside, then held. A fist hit it again, harder. The sound thudded through the cramped room like a warning drum. Nico Fontaine did not step back. He stood with his shoulders squared, blocking the door without meaning to, as if his body had decided nothing else would enter until he allowed it. His gray eyes stayed locked on the maid's face, cold enough to sting. You have 30 seconds, he said. Each word landed heavy. Before I open that door and let them deal with you. The maid's breathing came in sharp pulls. Sweat darkened the edge of her hairline where chestnut strands had slipped loose. Her fingers still circled his wrist, not softening, not apologizing. She let go anyway, slowly. Outside, Veronica's voice sliced through the wood. "Nico, don't listen to her. Open the door. Now." Another slam. The metal latch rattled, answering with a thin, stubborn clink. The maid's gaze flicked to the handle, then back to Nico. She seemed to measure him the way a drowning person measures a hand offered from the shore. "I don't need your trust," she said. Her voice steadied, low and raw. "I need your attention." Nico's jaw flexed. "You broke into my wedding. I broke into your last chance," she answered. Too fast to think about politeness. The words hung there. The lamp hummed. A coat hanger swayed slightly from the vibrations at the door. Nico's eyes narrowed. "Say what you came to say." The maid's hand went to her inner pocket, under the black uniform where the fabric lay close to her ribs. Her fingers hesitated for half a beat, a breath. Then she pulled out a small object, wrapped in the dark warmth of her palm, an antique wooden music box. It was carved with roses so fine they looked like they might bleed if you touched them too hard. The edges were worn in places where someone had opened it 1,000 times. In the lamplight, the wood gleamed like old lacquer, holding the quiet dignity of something that had been loved. Nico went still. His pupils tightened, and the cold in his face shifted, not into softness, but into something like being struck. His hand lifted, as if on instinct, then froze halfway. His throat moved. "That's—" the word scraped out. He cleared it away with a sharper breath. "Where did you get that?" The maid didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She held it out with both hands, the way you would hold out a fragile truth. "Kate left it for you," she said. She hid something inside. Outside, another pounding hit the door. This time it was accompanied by a muffled shout from a guard. "Mr. Fontaine, open up!" Veronica's voice followed, sweeter now, desperate in that practiced way. "My love, please. You're scaring everyone." Nico didn't look at the door. He stared at the music box until it seemed to fill the entire room. "That box was in my house," he said. "In a room no one was allowed to enter. I entered it," the maid said. Her voice trembled once, then tightened. "I had a key." Nico's gaze snapped to her face. "Who gave you a key?" "Mrs. Patterson," she said. "She's been silent for 2 years." For a second, the room felt like it tilted. Nico's fingers finally closed around the music box. His hands were large, capable hands. Hands that had signed contracts that ended men. Hands that never shook. They shook now, faintly, as if his body recognized something his mind had refused to touch. He lowered his eyes to the roses carved into the lid. His thumb traced one curve, slow, almost careful. "How do you know this is Kate's?" he asked, voice rougher than before. The maid swallowed. "Because it plays her favorite piece." Nico's jaw tightened hard enough to show the muscle jumping. He looked up, a flash of anger passing behind his eyes like a blade. "If you're lying," he said, quiet and lethal, "I will bury you where no one finds you." The maid's eyes stayed on him, glassy but unflinching. "Then bury me after," she said. "Not before you see what she left." A short silence filled the coat room, thick as fabric. Then Nico opened the lid. A delicate metallic click. The first notes of Claire de Lune rose into the cramped air, soft, aching, impossibly familiar. The melody did not belong in a room that smelled like old coats and sweat. It belonged to candlelight and laughter, and a life that had ended too suddenly. The music wrapped around Nico's ribs like a memory with hands. His face didn't change all at once. It cracked in thin lines. His eyes flicked down, faster now, searching inside the velvet-lined compartment as if afraid it would be empty. There, tucked beneath the lining, sat a carefully folded letter. Nico's breathing stalled. He lifted it with 2 fingers, as though it might burn. The paper looked slightly yellowed at the edges, the fold worn where it had been opened and closed in someone's mind 100 times. His gaze caught on the handwriting, Kate's handwriting, the way the letters leaned slightly right, the way her loops tightened when she was anxious, the tiny circles over her eyes, the small, stubborn elegance of it. His throat worked. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, he unfolded the paper with slow, precise movements, fighting the tremor in his hands. The maid watched him, her fingers twisting together at her waist, nails biting skin without noticing. The outside world kept trying to break in, fists on oak, voices, metal rattling, but inside the coat room, the music held the space like a spell. Nico's eyes moved across the first lines, his face drained. Then it tightened. His gaze sharpened and blurred at the same time, as if rage and grief were struggling for the same place in his chest. The maid's voice came softly, careful not to shatter him. "She knew," she said. "She tried to warn you." A sound left Nico that wasn't a word. It was the breath of a man, realizing he had been living beside a lie. His fingers curled around the letter until the paper creased. He forced himself to loosen his grip, forced himself to keep reading. Outside, Veronica screamed again, the sweetness gone. "Open the door, Nico. She's manipulating you." The maid flinched at the sound, but Nico didn't. He stood as if rooted, the music threading through the room, the letter trembling in his hands. When he looked up, tears sat on his lower lashes like something he hated and couldn't stop. 2 years, he whispered, voice breaking on the edge of fury. 2 years. The maid's hand went back to her inner pocket. This time she pulled out a small silver USB drive and set it on the velvet chair beside him, like a weapon laid on an altar. "She didn't only write," she said. "She recorded." Nico stared at the USB, as if it were a heartbeat he'd thought was gone. The pounding on the door became frantic. Nico's eyes lifted, and the grief in them hardened into focus. Something in his posture changed, subtle and terrifying. The man drowning in sorrow was gone. The man who survived by control returned. He folded Kate's letter once, neatly, and slid it into the inside pocket of his suit with a care that looked like reverence. Then he picked up the USB. His voice went flat, calm, decisive. "Who else knows you have this?" The maid swallowed, and for the first time her bravado wavered, replaced by naked urgency. "Only me," she said, "and the woman who gave me the key." Nico's gaze flicked to the door handle, then back to her. The lamp's light caught in his eyes like ice turning to steel. "Then we move," he said. He stepped toward the door. The music still played, thin and aching, as his hand closed around the knob. 48 hours earlier, the Fontaine estate looked like it had been built to outlive guilt. Graystone walls rose behind wrought iron gates, dark and clean under late afternoon sun. Stained glass threw colored shadows across marble floors. Somewhere outside, a fountain kept pouring water into itself. A steady sound that made the house feel calm on purpose. Inside the main sitting room, calm was a performance. A Wedgwood teacup sat on a silver tray in Audrey Shaw's hands, the porcelain warmed by fresh Earl Grey. 8 months of work had trained her body to move quietly in rooms like this. Smooth steps, eyes down, breath shallow, no mistakes. Veronica Sterling reclined on a crimson velvet sofa, as if it belonged to her already. Turquoise Valentino clung to her like the room's second layer of wealth. Her blonde hair was perfect, her lips too red to look accidental. She didn't glance at Audrey so much as through her. Audrey lowered the tray toward the low table with care. Her fingers released the edge of the cup as gently as setting down a secret. The cup shattered anyway. A sharp crack split the room, loud enough to startle the air. Porcelain exploded into bright fragments across cold marble. Tea surged outward in a steaming brown fan, soaking into the Persian rug like a spreading bruise. Audrey froze, hand hovering over empty space, heart punching once against her ribs. She hadn't dropped it. Veronica's heel, vivid red and pointed like a threat, had tapped the table's edge with a precise flick. The movement was small, almost elegant. The satisfaction behind it was not. Veronica rose in one smooth motion. Her expression twisted into fury so quickly it looked rehearsed. "You filthy little maid." Her voice rang sharp, too loud for the size of the insult. "Do you know how much these shoes cost?" Audrey's eyes dropped to the floor. T lapped toward the red heels resting carelessly near the edge of the rug, as if daring the stain to come closer. "More than you make in a year," Veronica continued, stepping nearer. The scent of expensive perfume hit Audrey's throat, bright and choking. "How do you plan to pay me back? With what? That skinny, ugly body?" Audrey's mouth opened, then closed. A simple truth sat behind her teeth. "You did this, but it felt heavier than the silver tray." In this house, truth needed permission. In the corner, Mrs. Patterson stood with a cloth folded in her hands, spine straight, face smooth as stone. Her eyes flicked once to the broken cup, once to Audrey's frozen posture, then away. Silence settled on her shoulders like a familiar coat. Veronica's gaze cut to Audrey's knees. "Clean it up," she said, "with your hands." Audrey looked up before she could stop herself. For a second, her green eyes widened, and Veronica smiled as if she'd won something private. "With the cloth in your apron," Veronica added, voice turning almost pleasant, "and scrub my shoes. Hard." The marble felt colder when Audrey sank down. Her knees met the warm puddle of tea. Porcelain shards bit through thin fabric with quick, bright pain. She hissed quietly, swallowing it before it could become a sound anyone noticed. She pulled the white cloth from her apron. It shook in her fingers. Tea clung to the cloth instantly, staining it the color of old pennies. Audrey bent forward and began wiping the glossy red heel. Her fingertips brushed the leather. Smooth, impossibly expensive, ridiculously easy to ruin. Veronica's shadow fell over her. A sharp kick struck Audrey's shoulder. The impact jolted her sideways, palm skidding through tea, pain firing up her arm. "Scrub harder," Veronica hissed. The thin heel pressed into Audrey's collarbone with needlepoint cruelty. "And don't let your cheap poverty smell get on my things." Audrey's jaw clenched. Blood filled her mouth where her lips split against her teeth. She kept her gaze on the shoe as if it were a job, as if humiliation could be made invisible by pretending it was only work. In her mind, a hospital room flashed. Pale walls, the beep of a monitor, Tommy's thin wrist under a blanket. 16 years old with a heart that never behaved. $200,000. A number she carried the way other people carried prayer. If she lost this job, that number became a coffin. Tears slid down her cheeks, silent, mixing with cooling tea on the marble. She didn't wipe them. Her hands were busy. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, steady, heavy, decisive. The kind of footsteps people made when they expected doors to open before they reached them. Audrey's stomach tightened. The room's air shifted, as if the house itself recognized who was coming. Nico Fontaine entered without hurry. He wore a black Tom Ford suit that didn't wrinkle under power. His face was sharply cut, his jaw squared, his gray eyes distant as winter water. There was a tiredness buried in them, a sorrow too deep to invite sympathy. It made him look dangerous in a quiet way, like a blade left on a table in a room full of children. Behind him, the room seemed to shrink. Veronica turned toward him and transformed. The fury vanished. Her shoulders softened. Her mouth trembled. Her eyes filled, perfectly timed, with tears that made her look fragile in a $1,000,000 dress. "Nico!" she breathed, sliding into his space, clutching his arm. Her nails dug lightly into his sleeve, as if she needed him to stay solid. "I only asked for tea. She spilled it all over the shoes you gave me, the ones I love most. It's it's a bad omen for tomorrow." Audrey stared from the floor, stunned at how easily the lie walked upright. Nico's gaze swept the scene. Broken porcelain, stained rug, tea bleeding into ancient patterns, a maid kneeling in shards, Veronica clinging to his arm like a pearl. His expression didn't change with understanding. It changed with exhaustion. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask why Audrey's knees were wet with tea, why her shoulders trembled, why Mrs. Patterson's hands tightened around a cloth she never used. His eyes passed over Audrey as if she were air. "Get out," he said. 2 words. Cold, final, not shouted. Worse, delivered like a routine decision he couldn't afford to care about. Audrey's breath caught. Pain flared somewhere deeper than the cuts in her knees. Nico's voice didn't soften. "Don't cause any more disturbance. Next time, be more careful. Or find another job." He turned away with Veronica still attached to his arm, moving toward the stairs as if the kneeling girl did not exist. Veronica threw a glance over her shoulder, quick, satisfied. Private then followed him, heels clicking like applause. Audrey stayed on the marble for a second too long, staring at the retreating back of a man who had the power to stop cruelty and chose not to look at it. Being hated would have meant she mattered. Being ignored made her feel like dust. She forced herself up. Her knees screamed. Blood seeped through black fabric. She picked up the silver tray with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, bowed her head, and spoke the only words allowed in this house. "Yes, Mr. Fontaine." She walked out of the sitting room with her eyes down, the smell of tea and expensive perfume clinging to her like a stain that wouldn't wash out. The corridor outside the sitting room swallowed sound the way the mansion swallowed people. Audrey moved fast, head lowered, tray held tight against her ribs. Her knees burned with every step, porcelain cuts stinging as warm blood glued fabric to skin. The air smelled of lemon polish and old money, and the oil paintings along the walls watched her with faces that never learned mercy. She told herself not to look back. She told herself to keep breathing. For Tommy, a door ahead stood slightly ajar, just a thin black line in the wall. The library. Audrey should have passed it without slowing. Staff didn't linger near closed doors in this house. Staff didn't listen. Then Veronica's voice slid through the crack. Not the honeyed tone she used when Nico was near. Not the shrill scream she used when she wanted witnesses. This was something else, low, confident, vicious in a way that made Audrey's stomach clench. Audrey stopped so abruptly, the tray tipped, silver ringing softly against her uniform buttons. She froze, heart punching at her throat. "Move," she told herself, but her feet wouldn't. She stepped into the nearest shadow, pressing her back against the cold wall. The corridor light flickered once, and the darkness under the painting frames deepened. Audrey held her breath until her chest hurt, then leaned just close enough for the words to sharpen. "He's still crazy about me," Veronica said, laughing under her breath. A man's voice answered, muffled, amused. Audrey couldn't make out the words, only the tone close, intimate, familiar. Veronica's laugh turned crueler. "Don't worry. That man is stupid. All he does is drown in memories of his dead wife. Pathetic." Audrey's fingers tightened around the tray edge so hard her knuckles blanched. Dead wife. Nico's late wife. Kate Fontaine. The name carried weight in Chicago. People spoke it softly, like the tragedy might bite. Veronica continued, voice bright with contempt. After the honeymoon, he ends up just like Kate. Then, no one's in our way. Audrey stopped breathing, just like Kate. Her mind tried to reject it, misheard, misunderstood. But the chill crawling up her spine didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt like instinct recognizing teeth. The inheritance papers are ready, Veronica said. My lawyer finished everything. All I need is his signature tonight. Audrey's mouth went dry. Signature tonight. Before the wedding. Before any of it became untouchable. Veronica's voice softened the way poison softens before it kills. He trusts me. Blindly. A pause. The faint clink of glass. Ice against crystal. Then Veronica spoke again, and the words dropped into Audrey's chest like stones. Don't worry, baby. I've got the medicine. This new kind doesn't leave any trace. Not even an autopsy can detect it. Audrey's hand flew to her mouth. Her breath hit her palm in hot bursts. Her knees threatened to fold. The hallway felt too narrow, the ceiling too low. The house smelled suddenly sour, like polish couldn't cover rot. A few more doses, Veronica said, almost singing it. And it's over. He'll sleep forever, just like his poor wife did. Audrey's vision blurred. For a second, she saw the teacup shattering again, porcelain turning into bones. She saw Nico's empty eyes at the altar of grief. She saw Veronica's smile like a clean blade. Kate hadn't died of a heart condition. Kate had been murdered. And then, Veronica continued, voice warm now, intimate. You and I have everything. The Fontaine Empire, money, power, all of it. The man's voice murmured something low. Audrey heard only a soft laugh from Veronica, satisfied and sharp. No one will suspect a thing, Veronica said. A grieving widow. Who would ever suspect her? Her laughter rang out again, and it was too bright to be human. Audrey's stomach lurched. Her cuts throbbed. Her heart beat so hard, she felt it in her fingertips. She had to leave. Now, the click of heels sounded on the library floor, moving toward the door. Audrey panicked. She turned and ran. Her shoes slipped once on the polished marble. The tray wobbled in her hands. Then she abandoned it without thinking, letting it clatter softly against the wall as she pushed forward. The sound echoed behind her like an accusation. She didn't look back. The corridor stretched too long, lights too dim, shadows too thick. Her breath roared in her ears. The mansion felt like it was closing its throat around her. Kitchen. She needed the kitchen. Noise. People. Witnesses. She rounded the corner too fast, and her knee smashed into the floor, pain flashing white. She bit down hard to keep from crying out, palms scraping marble, blood smeared on stone. Get up, get up. She forced herself upright and stumbled the last few steps, shoving through the kitchen door. Warm air hit her face, steam, garlic, detergent, the comfort of human labor. The kitchen was enormous, all stainless steel and stacked porcelain, bright under harsh fluorescent lights. It should have felt safe. Audrey pressed her back against the wall and gulped air like she'd been underwater. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't steady them. Her uniform clung damply to her knees, where tea and blood had dried together. What happened to you? Maggie Torres stood in front of her, holding a stack of plates against her hip. Her black curls were tied high, her brown eyes wide with alarm. She looked Audrey up and down, taking in the pallor, the trembling, the way Audrey's gaze kept darting to the door, as if expecting someone to step through it. Audrey, Maggie said again, softer now, urgent. "Oh my God, you look like you saw a ghost." Audrey opened her mouth, and nothing came out. She grabbed Maggie's sleeve with both hands and pulled her deeper into the kitchen, behind tall shelving packed with dry goods and linen bundles. The farther corner smelled of flour and cardboard, dimmer, quieter. Maggie stumbled after her, confusion turning into fear. When they reached a spot where the shelves blocked the view of the doorway, Audrey finally spoke, only a whisper, shaking so badly the words trembled. "Maggie," she said. "I heard her." Maggie's brow tightened. "Heard who?" "Veronica." Audrey swallowed, eyes glossy with terror. "She's going to kill him, like she killed Kate." Maggie's face drained. Her mouth opened, then snapped shut. She leaned closer, voice low and sharp. "What are you saying?" Audrey forced the words out in broken pieces, each one tasting like metal. "The dead wife. The signature tonight. The medicine that leaves no trace." The words, "sleep forever." Maggie stared at her, as if the kitchen floor had tilted. Then Maggie's hand shot up, covering Audrey's mouth hard enough to sting. "Are you crazy?" Maggie hissed through clenched teeth. Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen door, toward the bright open space where anyone could walk in. "Don't say that out loud. If anyone hears, we're dead." Audrey's breath hit Maggie's palm, hot and frantic. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. She nodded sharply, desperate, pleading without words. Maggie lowered her hand, but kept her voice pinned to a whisper. "Are you sure? You heard it clearly?" Audrey's head bobbed. "I'm sure." Maggie's hands trembled as she pressed them against the shelf behind her, trying to anchor herself. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, suddenly loud. Somewhere across the kitchen, a faucet dripped with steady patience. "We're just maids," Maggie whispered. The words came out like a verdict. "If we accuse her and we're wrong, we die. If we're right and can't prove it, we die anyway." Audrey's throat tightened until it hurt. She understood. She'd understood the moment Nico looked through her like air. A faint sound cut through the hum. Click, click. High heels on tile. Approaching the kitchen. Both women went silent. Maggie's eyes widened in pure panic. Audrey felt the blood drain from her face. They didn't need to turn to know. They ducked lower behind the shelving, bodies tucked into shadow, hands clamped over mouths to stop their breathing from becoming sound. The kitchen door opened. Veronica Sterling stepped inside. The turquoise dress caught the harsh kitchen light and still looked expensive enough to insult the room. She walked to the refrigerator with lazy confidence, as if the mansion belonged to her already. She took out a bottle of mineral water, twisted the cap, and drank. The plastic crack sounded too loud. Veronica paused mid-sip. Her icy blue eyes swept across the kitchen, slow and searching, as if she smelled fear the way dogs smell blood. Audrey held her breath until her lungs screamed. 1 second, 2, 3. Veronica's gaze lingered on the shelving, just long enough to turn Audrey's stomach into ice. Then Veronica shrugged, set the bottle down, and walked out. Her heels clicked away, fading down the hall. Only when the sound disappeared completely did Maggie and Audrey exhale long, shaking, almost silent. Maggie gripped Audrey's hand so tightly it hurt. "We need proof," Maggie whispered, voice trembling but firm. "Real proof. Without it, we're nothing." Audrey stared at the kitchen doorway, still expecting Veronica to return. And in the quiet after the danger passed, one thought landed in her mind like a burning command. If words were worthless, she would have to find something that wasn't. Night drained the Fontaine estate of its daytime shine and left only bone. The corridors went dim, lit by a few lamps that couldn't reach the corners. Shadows pooled beneath oil paintings, making the faces on canvas look watchful and tired. Somewhere beyond the stained glass windows, wind scraped softly along stone. The fountain outside kept running, steady and indifferent, like a heartbeat you could never stop. Audrey lay on the narrow bed in the servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling until it blurred. Every time she closed her eyes, Veronica's voice returned medicine. No trace. Sleep forever sliding through her mind like a blade you couldn't pull out. She turned onto her side. The mattress creaked. Her knee throbbed where porcelain had cut through fabric earlier. A faint metallic smell clung to her hands no matter how many times she washed them. Proof, Maggie had said. Real proof. Audrey swallowed, forcing air into her lungs. She couldn't stay still. Stillness felt like waiting for a knife to find her back. She sat up, pulled on a thin sweater over her uniform, and eased the door open. The basement hallway smelled of detergent and damp stone. Her steps were careful, soft against the floor. She told herself she was only walking, only calming down, but her body carried her upward anyway. Up the stairs, the air changed. It smelled cleaner, colder, expensive, in the way silence can be expensive. The mansion at night felt like a museum. After closing, no laughter, no music, only the faint hiss of heating vents and the occasional tick of wood settling into itself. Audrey reached the ground floor hall and stopped. Someone stood near the large portrait at the end of the corridor. A small figure with hair white as frost, perfectly still, as if the dark had grown a spine. Mrs. Patterson. Audrey's first instinct was to turn away. The housekeeper was not someone you startled, not someone you involved in danger. And yet the sight of her there, alone in the night, pulled Audrey's feet closer, as if the corridor itself had a current. The portrait was of Kate Fontaine. Even in paint, Kate looked warm blonde hair like wheat, blue eyes soft with a quiet kind of strength. Her smile seemed to bring light into the hallway that the lamps never could. Audrey's throat tightened as she looked at the face of a woman who had known she was dying. Mrs. Patterson didn't turn. Her gaze stayed on the portrait, as if she was waiting for it to speak. "You heard it too, didn't you, my girl?" The words came suddenly, thin and sharp in the quiet. Audrey flinched. Mrs. Patterson's voice held no anger, only exhaustion, heavy enough to bend a person. "I saw you running this afternoon," Mrs. Patterson continued, still not looking away. "I saw your face. You heard something from Miss Veronica." Audrey's mouth went dry. Her heart began to pound, not with the frantic panic of earlier, but with a slower fear. The kind that comes when you realize someone else has been watching you. Audrey started, then stopped. Lie or confess. Either could kill her. Mrs. Patterson finally turned. Her eyes were old, but not cloudy. Clear, steady, full of something that looked like grief sharpened into patience. "I know," she said softly. "I've known for a long time." The hallway seemed to narrow. The air felt colder. Audrey stared at her. "You knew? About her?" Mrs. Patterson's jaw tightened, a small muscle moving beneath thin skin. "About what she did to Mrs. Kate. About what she's planning now." Audrey felt her knees weaken. She pressed her fingertips against the wall to steady herself. The plaster was cold, almost wet. "Why didn't you—" The words broke off. Because she already knew the answer. This house taught everyone the same lesson. Silence is safer. Mrs. Patterson looked back at Kate's portrait. Her voice dropped even lower, as if the walls had ears. "Mrs. Kate suspected something before she died. She told me she felt unwell after every time she took the supplements Dr. Harris gave her. Dizziness, racing heart, exhaustion that didn't make sense." Audrey's stomach turned. The name Dr. Harris landed like a weight. The doctor insisted it was stress. Mrs. Patterson continued. But Mrs. Kate was not foolish. She wrote a letter. My girl. She recorded her suspicions. She hid it. Audrey's breath caught. Where? Mrs. Patterson's gaze flicked back to the portrait, then to Audrey. A hesitation crossed her face, fear, not of Audrey, but of what she was about to do. In the music box. Audrey blinked. Mrs. Patterson nodded once. An antique box carved with roses. Mr. Nico had it made for her in Italy. It plays Clair de Lune. Her eyes softened for a moment, remembering. It was their song. The thought of that melody in this dark hallway made Audrey's chest ache. After Mrs. Kate died, Mrs. Patterson said, Mr. Nico sealed her things away in a storage room on the 3rd floor. He forbade anyone to enter. No dust disturbed, no memories touched. Audrey swallowed, tasting fear. Then, how? Mrs. Patterson slid a hand into her pocket and pulled out a small brass key. It looked old, worn smooth by years of being clenched too tightly. The metal caught a sliver of lamplight and glowed dull gold. I kept this, she said. Audrey stared at it as if it were a live thing. 2 years, Mrs. Patterson murmured. 2 years of knowing and doing nothing. I told myself I was protecting the house, protecting Mr. Nico, protecting myself. Her mouth tightened into something bitter. All I protected was the lie. Her hand trembled slightly as she placed the key in Audrey's palm. The brass felt cold, heavy, like a decision. Audrey's fingers curled around it automatically. The edges pressed into her skin. Mrs. Patterson's eyes held Audrey's. I'm too old, my girl, she said, too afraid. I've spent my life obeying, staying quiet, watching horrors, and calling it duty. Audrey's throat tightened. She tried to speak, but only a rough breath came out. Mrs. Patterson's gaze flicked downward to Audrey's hands, then to the faint stains still clinging to the seams of her uniform, to the way Audrey stood like someone bracing against a storm. I saw you today, Mrs. Patterson said, kneeling on that floor, bleeding, and you didn't scream. You didn't beg. You swallowed it because you had to keep going. Audrey's eyes burned. She looked away, ashamed of the tears rising again. Mrs. Patterson's voice softened, but the words landed harder. You still have fire. I don't. That's why I'm giving you this. Audrey stared at the key until the brass blurred. The 3rd floor. Forbidden. A door locked for 2 years. If she went up there and got caught, there would be no second warning. No simple firing. People disappeared in this world for less. Audrey's hand tightened until the key bit her palm. She thought of Tommy, the hospital smell, the thinness of his wrist, the way his voice had tried to sound brave. She thought of Kate's portrait, smiling without knowing how close death already was. She thought of Nico Fontaine's eyes, cold, tired, walking toward a wedding, like a man walking into a grave. He had ignored her. He had dismissed her like dust, but he didn't deserve to die. No one deserved to die believing love was real while poison waited in their glass. Audrey lifted her gaze to Mrs. Patterson. Her voice shook, but it held. I'll find it, she said. Mrs. Patterson exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding that breath for 2 years. Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Be careful, she whispered. And if you succeed, Audrey swallowed. Then we'll have proof. Mrs. Patterson nodded once, sharp and final. Then she turned back to Kate's portrait, as if placing her next words into the painted woman's hands. Audrey closed her fingers around the key and stepped away, the metal cold against her skin. The mansion's silence followed her down the corridor. But now, in the center of that silence, she carried something heavier than fear. she carried away to break it. 2 in the morning turned the Fontaine mansion into a sealed coffin. The air felt colder on the upper floors, as if grief had weight and sank upward. Audrey stood at the bottom of the staircase to the 3rd floor, with the brass key clenched in her palm. Sweat slicked the metal. Her heart beat hard enough to shake her ribs. The 3rd floor was forbidden. Everyone knew it. The servants didn't even dust the banister above the 2nd landing. They acted like the stairs ended, like the hallway beyond was a wall. Audrey forced herself to breathe through her nose, slow and quiet. 1 step, another. Wood creaked under her weight, thin and complaining in the dark. She froze each time, waiting for a voice, a door opening, a flashlight beam slicing into her face. Nothing. Only the distant hiss of heating vents and the far-off rush of the fountain outside, muffled through stone. At the top, the 3rd floor hallway swallowed light. No lamps burned here. Dust coated the floor in a dull gray film, untouched for years. Audrey clicked on her phone flashlight, keeping the beam low. The narrow cone of light swept over framed photographs, draped in pale cloth, and furniture covered like silent bodies. At the end of the corridor stood a heavy oak door. Kate's storage room. Audrey's throat tightened. The key felt heavier now, as if it knew what it would unlock. She slid it into the lock. Metal scraped. The sound echoed too loud in the stillness. Audrey flinched, holding her breath until her lungs ached. Then she turned the key. The lock gave with a reluctant clunk. She pushed the door open just enough to slip inside, then pulled it shut behind her. The wood settled with a soft thud that sounded like a final decision. The room smelled like dust and old perfume, faint and sweet, trapped for years under cloth and time. Audrey's flashlight beam cut through floating particles, turning them into tiny drifting stars. White sheets covered most of the furniture, hanging in loose folds like ghosts. Boxes lined the walls. A wardrobe stood half open, clothing inside still shaped like someone might return to wear it. On the wall, a framed wedding photograph watched her, Kate Fontaine in white, laughing, and beside her, Nico Fontaine with his arm around her waist, smiling, truly smiling in a way Audrey had never seen on his face. His gray eyes in the picture looked alive, warm, human. The sight tightened Audrey's chest until it hurt. Focus, she told herself. She moved carefully, lifting the edge of a cloth, peering into drawers, scanning shelves. Her flashlight skimmed over jewelry boxes, perfume bottles, stacks of letters tied with ribbon. The room held a life paused mid-breath. No music box. Audrey's hands began to shake, not from cold, but from time. Every second here was a risk. Every sound could be the start of footsteps. She crouched to look beneath a vanity. Nothing but dust. She opened a drawer. Inside were delicate gloves, folded neatly, lace soft as skin. She shut it fast. Her beam swept under the bed. In the far corner, half hidden in shadow, sat an old wooden trunk coated in dust. Audrey dragged it out, the wood scraping softly against the floor. Her fingers fumbled at the clasp, then pulled it open. Inside lay keepsakes, photographs, dried flowers, handwritten notes, a silk ribbon, a small book with Kate's name inside the cover. Tucked into one corner, wrapped in red velvet, was the music box. Audrey's breath caught. She lifted it gently, as if it might crumble. The rose carvings on the lid were intricate and worn in places where hands had loved it. The wood felt cool and smooth beneath her fingertips. She opened it. A delicate click, then Clair de Lune spilled into the room soft, aching, impossibly tender in the dark. The melody filled the dust-filled space with warmth that made Audrey's eyes burn. Beneath the velvet lining, something rectangular lay hidden, a neatly folded letter, and beside it, a small silver USB drive. Audrey's fingers trembled as she lifted the letter out. The paper felt thin, fragile, like it had been folded and refolded in secret. She unfolded it under the flashlight beam, eyes scanning the handwriting. My beloved Nico. Audrey read with her lips barely moving, soundless. Each line tightened the knot in her chest. Veronica is not who she pretends to be. I have seen her with another man. They call him the Fox. Dr. Harris has been giving me supplements that make me weaker every day. I believe they are poisoning me. I recorded everything I could on the USB. Please, my love, be careful. The words blurred as tears spilled onto the paper. Audrey blinked hard, but more tears came. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth to keep from making a sound. Kate had known. She had known she was dying, and had still tried to leave a path for the man she loved. Audrey wiped her face with the back of her hand, then carefully folded the letter and slipped it into her inner pocket, beneath her sweater, close to her ribs. She tucked the USB beside it, the plastic edge pressed against her skin like a promise. She lowered the music box back into the trunk, hands shaking, and began to push the trunk under the bed again. That was when the lights snapped on. Bright, sudden, brutal. Audrey jerked upright, blinking against the glare. Her stomach dropped so hard it felt like falling downstairs. Veronica Sterling stood in the doorway. She leaned against the frame like she'd been waiting for this moment. Blonde hair loose, a silk robe the color of dried blood tied at her waist. Her face looked calm, almost amused. Her icy blue eyes weren't sleepy at all. "Well," Veronica said, voice smooth and slow. "What do we have here?" Audrey's mind went blank. Her muscles locked. The letter and USB burned in her inner pocket like a secret screaming for air. Veronica stepped into the room, heels clicking on the dusty boards, as if she'd dressed for the role. Her gaze flicked over the disturbed dust, the trunk half out from under the bed, the music box lid not quite settled. "A little mouse," Veronica murmured, smiling. "Sneaking into a room she doesn't belong." Audrey forced her voice to work. "Miss Veronica, I got lost." Veronica's laugh was quiet, sharp, lost. At 2 in the morning, in a locked room, she moved closer until Audrey could smell her perfume, expensive, floral, wrong, in this tomb of a room. Veronica's eyes narrowed, searching Audrey's face the way a predator searches for weakness. "What are you hiding?" Veronica asked. Before Audrey could step back, Veronica grabbed her by the collar and yanked her forward. The fabric dug into Audrey's throat. Veronica's nails, painted blood red, slid into Audrey's apron pockets with quick, practiced motions. Audrey held her breath so hard spots danced in her vision. Nothing. Veronica pulled her hand out, empty. Her smile didn't fade, but it sharpened. "You're playing a game," she said softly. "I don't know what it is yet." She released Audrey with a shove that sent her stumbling into the bed frame. The wood hit Audrey's hip with a dull thud. Pain flared, but she didn't make a sound. Veronica tilted her head, studying her prey like she was deciding which method would be most enjoyable. Then Veronica's mouth curved into something almost gentle. "You know what?" she said. "I don't need to know what you're looking for." She reached into her robe pocket and pulled out her phone. "I only need to get rid of you." Her thumb tapped the screen with lazy confidence. The ringtone sounded loud in the stale room, too bright, too modern against dust and dead memories. Audrey's heart hammered. If Nico came, if he saw her here, if Veronica accused her. Veronica lifted the phone to her ear, voice instantly turning sweet, fragile, perfectly timed. "Nico, sweetheart," she cooed, "I'm sorry to bother you, but you need to come up to Kate's room right now. Something happened. I caught a little mouse sneaking around in here." She ended the call and looked at Audrey with pure satisfaction. Now we wait, Veronica whispered, and see how your boss deals with you. A moment later, heavy footsteps sounded in the hall, steady and angry, coming fast. Audrey's fingers curled into fists at her sides, nails biting skin. The door opened again. Nico Fontaine stepped in, wearing a wrinkled white dress shirt, hair slightly disordered, gray eyes red with interrupted sleep. Behind him stood Finn O'Brien, broad-shouldered and silent, his gaze scanning the room with cold precision. Nico's eyes landed on Audrey. Recognition flashed, then disgust. "You," Nico said, voice low and furious. "Again?" Veronica ran to him immediately, pressing herself to his arm like a frightened bride, rehearsing for daylight. Her eyes glistened as if tears had been waiting backstage. "I heard a noise," she whispered. "I came to check. She was rummaging through Kate's things. I think she's stealing." Audrey's mouth opened. No sound came out. The letter and USB pressed against her ribs like a heartbeat that could save him if she lived long enough to put it in his hands. The room felt smaller with Nico Fontaine inside it. His presence pressed into the air, the way a storm presses into a valley, heavy and inevitable. The dust in Kate's storage room hung frozen in the harsh ceiling light, catching on Finn O'Brien's broad shoulders as he stepped in behind his boss. Finn's eyes moved once across the space trunk, disturbed sheets, the bed edge, then settled on Audrey with the patience of someone trained to wait for commands. Veronica stayed curled around Nico's arm. Her voice was soft, shaken, perfectly pitched to sound afraid. "She was searching," Veronica whispered. "I don't know what she wanted, but she was in here." Nico's gaze cut to Audrey. The gray in his eyes looked like steel left out in winter. He didn't ask how she got upstairs. He didn't ask why she was trembling. His focus landed on one thing only: the room that had been sealed by his order. "You violated my rule," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "No one enters here." Audrey forced herself to breathe. The letter and USB pressed against her ribs, hidden under fabric. Every heartbeat felt too loud. "I can explain," she began, the words scraping out. Veronica turned her face up to Nico, eyes glistening. "Check her pockets," she said, gentle as a suggestion, sweet as poison. "I think she took something. Kate's diamond necklace. The one you gave her." Nico's jaw tightened. A flicker passed through his eyes, pain buried fast. Finn stepped forward without waiting for permission. "Sorry," he said, curt, and reached for Audrey's apron. Audrey went rigid. Her hands hovered at her sides, fingers twitching as if they wanted to fight or run. She didn't move. A wrong motion would look like guilt, she told herself again and again. The inner pocket is safe. Finn's hands worked quickly. Professional. He searched the apron pockets first, then the seams, then the waistband. Audrey's stomach dropped with each touch. But the letter stayed where it was, pressed against her skin, invisible. For a brief second, it seemed like Veronica's plan might fail. Then something glittered. A sharp clink hit the floor. A diamond necklace lay at Audrey's feet, the stones catching the overhead light in cruel little flashes. Audrey stared at it, as if it had appeared from thin air. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Finn looked down once, then up at Nico. Veronica's breath came out as a small, shocked gasp. She pressed her hand to her lips, performing heartbreak like prayer. "Oh no," she whispered. Audrey's chest tightened until it hurt to inhale. "I didn't take that," she said, voice cracking. "I swear I didn't." Nico bent slowly and picked up the necklace. His fingers brushed the diamonds with a tenderness that didn't belong in the room. The gesture was small, but it held a lifetime inside it. "You were warned," Nico said, voice low. "You were given work here. You were given a chance." Audrey shook her head hard. "She put it there," she blurted, pointing with a trembling hand. "She planted it in my pocket. She—" Veronica's expression didn't change. Her eyes stayed wide, wounded, innocent. If anything, her lips trembled, as if Audrey's accusation had physically hurt her. "Poor girl," Veronica murmured. "She's desperate." Audrey's throat burned. She stepped forward without thinking. "Mr. Fontaine, please, listen. I didn't come here to steal. I came because—" Nico's gaze snapped to her face. The tiredness in his eyes sharpened into contempt. "You came because you're a thief," he said. The words hit harder than the kick Veronica had given her earlier. Audrey swallowed, forcing air into lungs that refused to work. "No," she whispered. "I came because you're in danger." The room went still. Finn paused mid-motion. Even Veronica's breathing seemed to hold for a fraction of a second. Audrey's voice shook, but it kept going, pushed forward by terror and the weight of Kate's letter against her chest. "Kate didn't die of a heart condition," Audrey said. "She was murdered. Veronica did it. And she's going to do it again." "To you?" After the honeymoon, Veronica let out a small laugh that sounded like pity wrapped in silk. "She's unwell," Veronica said softly, turning to Nico. "She's making up stories to escape punishment. You can see that, can't you?" Nico didn't answer immediately. He stared at Audrey as if searching for something he didn't want to find. For a brief heartbeat, something unreadable flickered in his eyes, hesitation, or the ghost of doubt. Audrey seized it. "I have proof," she said, breathless. "Kate left proof. Please just give me 1 minute." Veronica's hand tightened on Nico's sleeve. "Nico," she whispered, the sweetness sharpening. "Don't let her poison your mind. She's trespassed. She stole from Kate. She's trying to ruin everything." Nico's face hardened. The moment of hesitation sealed shut like a door. His voice turned flat. "Get her out." Audrey's stomach dropped. "Now," Nico added, and the word sounded like a sentence. "And make sure she never works anywhere in this city again." Finn reached for Audrey's arm. Audrey jerked away on instinct, panic snapping through her like electricity. She struggled, twisting, trying to pull free. "Please!" she cried. "Please listen. Kate was murdered. You're next." She left a letter. Finn's grip locked, iron and controlled. He dragged Audrey toward the door with steady force. The storage room spun around her in flashes white sheets, dust in the light. Kate's wedding photo smiling on the wall like a cruel memory. Veronica watched as Audrey was hauled away. Her eyes were calm now, almost bored. For a split second, her mouth curved into a smile that didn't belong on a bride's face. Audrey fought harder, desperation turning her limbs wild. "You have to believe me," she shouted. "She's going to kill you." Nico didn't look back. Finn pulled Audrey down the dark stairwell. The mansion's silence swallowed her voice as soon as she left the 3rd floor. The only sounds were Finn's boots thudding on steps and Audrey's ragged breathing. They passed sleeping halls, locked doors, cold lamps. Audrey's shoulder hit a wall once. Pain flashed, but she kept trying to twist free. "Finn," she gasped, half pleading, half commanding, "check my inner pocket. Please. There's—" Finn's face didn't change. He didn't answer. He moved like a machine, obeying an order. The front doors opened to the night. Cold air slammed into Audrey's face, sharp as a blade. The estate's driveway stretched dark and empty under pale moonlight. The fountain hissed in the distance, steady and indifferent, as if nothing in the world could truly change. Finn shoved her forward. The iron gates loomed beyond, black bars against black sky. "Go," Finn said, voice low. Not cruel, not kind, just done. The gates opened with a slow, mechanical groan, then shut behind her with a booming clang that echoed through the night like a coffin lid. Audrey stumbled onto the road. The wind cut through her uniform as if it weren't there. Her knees ached. Her hands shook. She had no bag, no phone, no money, nothing but the clothes on her back and the fear pressing down inside her chest. Then her fingers went to her inner pocket. The letter was still there. The USB was still there. Audrey's breath hitched. Relief flooded her so hard it nearly knocked her off her feet. Veronica had won this round. Nico had chosen blindness, but the truth hadn't been taken. Audrey looked back at the mansion, a dark shape against the sky, windows lit like watchful eyes. A cold thought settled into her spine. If Nico wouldn't listen in his house, he would have to listen in public. Her lips parted on a silent vow. She turned away from the gates and started walking into the Chicago night, the proof against her heart beating in time with every step. The oak door swung open, and the cathedral's noise rushed in like a living tide. Incense and lilies crashed into the cramped coat room, chased by frantic voices and the hard thud of fists on wood. Nico stepped out first. His posture had changed. The grief was still there, but it had been locked behind something colder and sharper, the way a blade looks calm after it is drawn. Audrey followed half a step behind him, hands still trembling, her inner pocket suddenly light. The music box was no longer in her grip. The letter was no longer against her ribs. Nico carried them now, close to his chest, hidden inside his suit like something sacred and dangerous. Guards surged forward on instinct. Finn moved first, sliding between Audrey and the nearest hands, palm lifted in a silent stop. His face stayed blank, but his eyes warned the room without a word. Veronica rushed toward Nico, veil fluttering, bouquet clenched so tightly the stems bent. Her smile was back on her mouth, glossy and desperate, the kind meant to hypnotize a crowd. My love, she breathed, voice sweet enough to drip. Thank God. What did that girl say to you? She's trying to ruin everything. Look at me, please. Nico did not look at her. He walked past her as if she were a decorative statue placed in his path. The rejection landed like a slap, loud in its silence. Veronica's face tightened. Her eyes flicked to Audrey for the first time, and something ugly flashed through the practiced brightness. Nico reached the microphone stand near the altar. The priest stood there like a man who had forgotten his lines, hands hovering uncertainly in front of his chest. The crowd had risen in waves. 500 bodies leaned forward, hungry for meaning. Phones hovered at shoulder height, screens glowing like small moons in the dim cathedral light. A low murmur rolled through the pews, swelling, then thinning as Nico's hand lifted slightly. Silence fell in pieces, then as a whole. Nico's voice carried without effort. The wedding is cancelled, he said, flat and final, effective immediately. For a heartbeat. The cathedral did not understand what it had heard. Then the sound returned all at once. Shocked breaths, rapid whispers, a few soft gasps that slipped into laughter, then died when no one joined them. Veronica stood frozen, as if the words had pinned her feet to the marble. She forced a laugh that came out thin and wrong. Nico, she said, voice trembling, still trying to keep it pretty. Stop. You're upset. You're being manipulated. In front of everyone? Nico turned his head slightly. When his gray eyes met hers, her performance cracked. There was no warmth, no confusion, no tired indifference. Only revulsion so cold it looked clean. Explain, Nico said. Veronica's lips parted, ready to pour out a story. Nico's voice cut deeper, quieter. Explain how you killed my wife. The cathedral went dead again, as if the building itself had stopped breathing. Veronica's face drained, her pupils tightened, the bouquet slipped in her fingers, petals trembling. "You're insane," she whispered. "You're listening to a servant. This is a joke. This is—" Nico moved one step closer. The shift in his shadow across her dress looked like a threat. "It is not a joke," he said. "And it is not a story." He turned his head toward Finn without raising his voice. The command still landed like a weapon being cocked. "Bring the evidence bag," Nico said. "Now." Finn's hand went inside his jacket. He pulled out a clear, sealed pouch, the kind used when something has to be handled without being touched again. Its plastic crinkled sharply in the cathedral hush. Nico reached into his suit and removed the small silver drive. He did it slowly, letting the nearest Rose see it. Not dramatic, not theatrical, clinical. Audrey stood beside Finn, knees trembling under her uniform, watching the room shift around the object the way weather shifts around lightning. Nico held the drive up between two fingers, then lowered it into the clear pouch. Finn sealed it with a firm press. The adhesive strip made a dry, ripping sound as it locked. Nico took a pen from Finn, uncapped it, and wrote on the label in hard, controlled strokes. Finn signed beneath it. The priest stared, then took the pen with shaking hands and added his name as witness. Nico lifted the pouch again, letting the front rows see the sealed edge, the signatures, the label. "Chain of custody begins here," Nico said, voice still calm. Veronica's breath began to come faster. Her smile tried to return and failed, trembling at the corners like cheap paint. "You can't do this," she hissed, her sweetness evaporating. "You have no proof." Nico's gaze slid toward Audrey for the first time since stepping out. It was not gentle, it was not romantic, it was simply different from before. He saw her now, fully, a person, not furniture. He turned back to the crowd. "There is more," Nico said. Finn produced a phone from his inner pocket and placed it in Nico's hand. The screen glowed blue against Nico's knuckles. Nico turned it outward so the front pews could see it, then angled it toward the nearest camera lenses that had already begun to zoom. The phone displayed a list of recordings labeled in Kate's name. A date and time were visible in the file titles, the kind of detail that makes lies harder to breathe. Nico pressed play. For a moment, only static filled the speakers, a low hiss like breath through teeth. Then Dr. Harris's voice came through, calm and clinical, discussing dosage and timing with chilling ease. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. The effect was immediate. A ripple of disbelief rolled through the pews. A woman covered her mouth. A man in the front row lowered his phone as if suddenly ashamed of recording. Veronica jerked backward, shaking her head hard, eyes wide with panic. "That's fake," she snapped, voice rising. "That's not real. He's—" Nico stopped the audio and looked at her. "You recognize the voice," he said. "You recognize the plan." Veronica's throat worked. She tried to speak, and nothing clean came out. Finn stepped forward again, one hand firm on her upper arm. Veronica whipped her head toward him, fury erupting. "Don't touch me," she hissed. "I'm his bride." Nico's voice dropped to ice. "You are a suspect," he said. "You will stand here." Veronica's eyes darted across the cathedral, searching for allies. Powerful faces looked away. Some stared with interest, others with calculation. No one moved to save her. Audrey stood near the edge of the altar steps, feeling the room tilt around her. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, fast and loud, and beneath it the soft, constant hum of phones recording history in real time. Nico lifted the microphone one last time. "Everyone will remain," he said. The authorities are coming. This will be handled properly. Then he turned slightly, just enough for Audrey to hear the next words meant only for the people closest to him. Stay beside Finn, Nico said. Do not leave his sight. Audrey's throat tightened. She managed a small nod. Veronica's gaze locked onto Audrey again, and the hatred in it was no longer hidden behind charm. It was naked, animal, and shaking. For the first time, Audrey understood something clearly. Veronica was no longer pretending, and that meant she was about to run. Veronica moved the way a cornered animal moves fast, vicious, and suddenly quiet. Finn's grip tightened on her arm, but she twisted with practiced strength, slamming her elbow backward into his ribs. The impact made a dull crack against bone. Finn's breath hitched for half a second. That half second was all she needed. She tore free, her gown caught under a pew, crystals snagging and popping loose like shattered ice. She didn't stop to fix it. She yanked hard, ripping lace and dragging the torn train behind her like a white burial shroud. Shouts burst through the cathedral. Guards lunged. Guests recoiled. Phones rose higher, hungry and horrified. Veronica sprinted for the rear exit. The marble floor slapped under her heels, the sound sharp and frantic. A countdown no one announced. A guard reached for her veil. She ducked, hair whipping loose. Another bodyguard tried to cut her off. She shoved him with both hands, nails scraping across his face. Blood streaked bright against black suit fabric. "Nico!" she screamed once, not pleading now, but raging. "You'll regret this." Nico did not chase. He stood near the altar with a stillness that made the chaos look small. His gray eyes tracked her path, the way a predator tracks a fleeing deer. He turned his head slightly toward Finn. "Close the perimeter," Nico said, voice calm enough to chill. "Now." Finn pressed a hand to his side where her elbow had hit, then spoke into his radio. The device crackled with rapid responses, voices overlapping, crisp and trained. Outside, the city was already moving. Veronica burst through the service doors into cold morning air. The back of the cathedral was lined with black SUVs, security staff, and a limousine meant to carry the bride to celebration. Now it looked like an escape route. She threw herself into the limousine and slammed the door. "O'Hare!" She barked at the driver, breath ragged. "International terminal. Now. $1 million if you get me there in 30 minutes. The driver's eyes flicked to her torn gown, her wild hair, the smear of mascara on her cheek. He didn't ask questions. He stepped on the gas. The car shot forward, tires biting pavement. The cathedral vanished behind them in a blur of stone and sirens that hadn't started yet. Veronica ripped her veil off with shaking hands and shoved it into the seat. The tiara followed, thrown like trash. She grabbed her handbag, unzipped the inner pocket, and pulled out what she'd been hoarding for a day like this. A passport under the name Emily Carter, a thick stack of cash, a burner phone. Her lips moved as she breathed. Just get on the plane. Just get out. She fought with the gown in the cramped back seat, yanking fabric up, tearing it down, finally wrenching herself free enough to pull on a plain black coat she had packed like a confession. Jewelry went into a cloth pouch. Diamonds clicked together like teeth. By the time the limousine curved into O'Hare, the bride had disappeared. A tired woman with tight hair and flat eyes stepped out, shoulders hunched against the wind, dragging a small carry-on she had grabbed from the trunk. Inside the terminal, fluorescent light washed everyone into the same pale color. The air smelled of coffee, jet fuel seeping in from the doors, and the faint metallic sting of disinfectant. Wheels clattered over tile. Flight announcements echoed overhead in calm voices that didn't know what was about to happen. Veronica moved through the crowd without looking at anyone long enough to be remembered. She kept her head slightly lowered, her face composed, her hands steady by force. She reached the Air France counter and slid the passport forward. Her fingers left no hesitation. "One first-class ticket to Paris," she said, voice controlled. "The earliest flight." The agent smiled politely, took the passport, and typed. Keys clicked in a steady rhythm. Veronica stared at the screen over the agent's shoulder, watching for any flicker of alarm. Nothing. The agent's smile stayed. "Of course, Miss Carter," the agent said. "Please wait a moment." Veronica's lungs loosened. Just a boarding pass. Then security. Then the gate. Then an aircraft door closing like a blessing. Behind her, the terminal noise shifted, subtle at first, like a current changing direction. A few heads turned. A few voices fell quiet. Then a cold voice cut through the airport air with perfect clarity. "Where do you think you're going, Veronica?" Her blood turned to ice. Veronica froze mid-breath. The world narrowed until there was only that voice behind her and the click of her own heartbeat in her ears. Slowly, she turned. Nico Fontaine stood a few yards away, still in his black wedding suit, as if the morning had been carved around him. His hair was perfect. His face was calm. His gray eyes were colder than the terminal's bright light. Finn stood beside him, ribs stiff but posture solid. Next to Finn was Detective Morrison, gray suit, badge clipped at his belt, eyes alert and tired like a man pulled out of bed for something real. Behind them, uniformed officers fanned out, sealing the area with quiet efficiency. Passengers stepped back instinctively, phones rising, whispers forming in the air like steam. Veronica's mouth opened. Her voice came out thin, disbelieving. "How are?" Nico took one step closer. His shoes made no sound on tile, but the space around him tightened anyway. "You forgot," he said. "I control the exits." Veronica's gaze flicked left and right. Officers, barriers. She forced a smile onto her mouth, the familiar one, soft, pleading, romantic. "Nico," she said, voice sweet as syrup. "My love, this is a misunderstanding." "That maid—" "Shut up," Nico said, and the word hit like a slap. Her smile faltered. Nico's gaze stayed steady. "I have Kate's letter. I have recordings, video, messages." And Dr. Harris confessed when they reached him. Veronica's eyes widened, the sweetness cracking. He wouldn't." "He did," Nico said. "The game is over." For a second, Veronica stood absolutely still. Then something in her face broke apart. The charm fell away like a mask yanked off by force, leaving rage underneath, raw, ugly, honest. "So what?" she spat. The words came out sharp, almost laughing. "Kate was weak. She didn't deserve you. She didn't know how to keep a husband. I did everything for us." Nico's expression did not change. "There was never an us," he said. "There was only your greed." End quote. Veronica's gaze snapped past him. She saw Audrey. Audrey stood slightly behind Finn, small in her dark uniform, hands clenched at her sides. Her eyes were wide but steady, like someone who had already burned through fear and found something harder beneath it. Veronica's body moved before her mind finished thinking. She lunged. Her nails were raised like claws. Officers surged forward. Two hands caught her arms. Another pressed her shoulder down. Veronica thrashed wildly, screaming, coat twisting, hair coming undone. Metal cuffs snapped shut around her wrists with a cold, final clack. The sound turned heads across the terminal. It made phones tilt closer. It made people inhale as if the air had changed. Veronica fought harder, face contorted, spit flying. "I'll kill you!" she shrieked at Audrey. "I'll kill you, you filthy!" A hand forced her head down. Her words fractured into incoherent rage. Detective Morrison stepped in, voice sharp. "Veronica Sterling, you're under arrest for the murder of Catherine Fontaine and conspiracy to commit murder." Veronica's laughter burst out suddenly high, cracked, unhinged. "Good luck proving it," she spat, then turned her head toward Nico, eyes blazing. "You'll regret this. I swear you'll regret this." Nico didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. His reply was flat, cold, finished. "The only thing I regret," he said, "is that I didn't see you sooner." Veronica was dragged away through a corridor of staring strangers and lifted phones, her once perfect appearance collapsing into chaos. Mascara smeared, hair tangled, coat crooked, wrists cuffed like a headline. Audrey watched her go, chest rising and falling too fast. Finn glanced at Audrey once, then back at Nico, as if confirming the world was still real. Nico's gray eyes stayed on the space where Veronica had been, not with longing, not with grief, only with a quiet certainty that felt like a door closing. The airport announcements continued overhead, calm and indifferent. But the terminal had changed, and so had the story people would tell when they got home. 3 months later, the courthouse air tasted like paper and old rain. Audrey sat on a hard wooden bench near the back, hands folded in her lap until her knuckles went pale. The room smelled of disinfectant and damp wool coats. Every few minutes, a bailiff's shoes clicked across tile, sharp and measured, like someone counting seconds out loud. Veronica Sterling stood at the defense table in a gray suit that tried to look harmless. It failed. Her blonde hair was pulled back tight, her jaw clenched, her eyes bright with a fury that never cooled. She didn't glance at Audrey. She didn't have to. The hatred still lived in the angle of her mouth. The judge's voice carried without emotion, reading a sentence like a final receipt: life imprisonment without parole. For a beat, the courtroom stayed still. Then Veronica's composure detonated. She screamed high, raw, stripped of elegance, and had to be restrained as deputies moved in, hands gripping her arms, dragging her toward the side door, while her voice echoed off wood paneling. Audrey didn't flinch. Her throat tightened, but her face stayed calm. The noise wasn't frightening anymore. It was simply the sound of a story ending the way it should. Dr. Harris stood afterward, shoulders collapsed, eyes fixed on the floor. When the number of years was read, he swallowed hard, as if trying to push guilt back down his throat. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He didn't look up. Outside, the city had already decided what to call it. The bloody wedding, the bride who ran, the maid who stopped it. Audrey walked out into pale sunlight with the crowd flowing around her. Reporters clustered like birds, microphones lifted, cameras ready to swallow her face. "Miss Shaw, was it true you?" "Audrey, look here. Tell us about the letter." She kept walking. She didn't answer. She didn't owe the world her voice. On the courthouse steps, Nico Fontaine waited. He didn't look like the man who had once stood at an altar with empty eyes. He wore a dark coat, no tie, hair slightly unkempt by wind. His gray eyes still held shadows, but they no longer looked hollow. They looked awake. Finn stood a few feet behind him, scanning the crowd, steady as a wall. Nico met Audrey's gaze for a quiet moment. He didn't speak. He simply held his hand out, not dramatic, not possessive, just an offered path through the swarm. Audrey took it. The reporters shouted louder as they moved, but Finn's presence carved space, and the two of them passed through the noise as if it belonged to another world. In the car, the city slid by in gray blocks and winter trees. The silence inside felt heavy, but not hostile. It was the kind of silence people share after surviving something that rewired them. Nico finally spoke, eyes forward. Your brother, he said. Tommy. Audrey's chest tightened. He's still in the hospital, she replied, voice careful. They're still waiting to schedule. Nico's jaw flexed once. He reached into his coat pocket and slid an envelope across the seat toward her. Thick, plain, no logo. Audrey stared at it without touching it. I paid it, Nico said. The words were simple. All of it. Audrey's breath caught. I can't. You can. He cut in. Not harsh, just firm. Not as a favor. Not as charity. As repayment. Audrey's fingers hovered over the envelope. Her mind flashed to Tommy's thin wrists, the monitor beeping, the way he tried to sound cheerful for her. Then another image rose. Veronica's heel on her collarbone. The humiliation. The feeling of being invisible. Audrey's hand closed on the envelope, but she didn't open it. I'll take what he needs, she said quietly, eyes fixed on the paper seam. The surgery, the medication, nothing else. Nico turned his head slightly, as if hearing the shape of her pride for the first time. A faint, almost imperceptible nod. Done, he said. A week later, the hospital hall smelled of antiseptic and weak coffee. The lights were too bright, the floor too glossy, the silence too full of waiting. Audrey stood outside the operating room with her hands clasped together so tightly her fingers went numb. She watched the red digital clock above the door flip minute by minute. Every change felt like a coin dropped into a deep well. Nico stood with her, not touching her, not speaking unless she spoke first. His presence was steady, quiet, support without pressure. When the surgeon finally came out, mask lowered, eyes tired, Audrey's heart stopped. Miss Shaw, the doctor said, and then the expression on his face softened. It went smoothly. Your brother is stable. He'll recover. Audrey's knees buckled. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling before she could stop them. The relief hit her like gravity. Nico's hand landed on her shoulder, brief, grounding, then gone again, as if he understood she needed space to feel it without being held. 2 days later, Tommy lay propped up in bed, color returning to his cheeks. He looked smaller without illness clinging to him, like a boy who finally had room to grow. He grinned at Nico the moment he saw him. So you're the scary guy, Tommy rasped, voice still thin but bright with humor. My sister never mentioned you had Mafia vibes. Nico's mouth twitched into something that almost resembled a smile. I'm working on it, he said dryly. Tommy's grin widened. Audrey's laugh came out startled, wet with tears. On the drive back, the city's skyline looked softer in late sun. Nico didn't take the long way to his estate. He didn't head toward skyscrapers or black SUVs. Instead, he stopped at a cemetery outside the city. Wind moved through bare branches with a low whisper. The ground was cold, the grass thin. Nico walked to a headstone carved with Kate's name and knelt. He set down white roses, petals bright against gray stone. For a moment, he said nothing. Then his voice came, low and rough, carried away by wind. I was blind, he murmured. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He didn't look at Audrey as he spoke. The apology wasn't for her. It was for the woman in the ground and the man he used to be. When he stood, his eyes were damp but clear. He adjusted his coat like someone putting himself back together. I'm shutting down parts of my business, Nico said, as they walked back toward the car. The parts that kept me alive in the dark. Audrey looked at him, unsure. You can do that? I have to, he said. Or Kate's truth means nothing. In the weeks that followed, Nico disappeared from the headlines. Not because he hid, because he refused to feed them. A foundation opened quietly, paperwork filed. Money moved with signatures and stamped dates, clean and traceable. Kate's hope, its first grants went to women's shelters, legal aid, and kids with medical bills that were crushing families like stones. Audrey didn't attend the ceremony. She didn't need a stage. She moved with Tommy into a small house, with a white fence and a patch of yard that caught sunlight in the afternoons. It wasn't grand, it was real. The air smelled of soil and fresh paint. The quiet felt earned. One evening, as the sky turned gold, an old green Jeep rolled to a stop by the gate. Nico stepped out, sleeves rolled. No suit, no shine. He carried a small paper bag. The scent of warm bread drifted out when he opened it. Tommy ran out first, laughing, breath strong, new heart beating steady. He grabbed the bag and tore it open like it was treasure. "You're late," Tommy declared. "That means you have to lose at catch." Nico arched a brow. "That's not how rules work." "It is in this house," Tommy said, and ran back into the yard. Audrey stood by the garden, hands smudged with dirt from new rose bushes. She wiped them on her apron, watching Nico approach. He stopped a few steps away, not crossing the distance like a man used to taking what he wanted. He waited, like someone learning how to ask. "I've been thinking," Nico said, voice quiet. Audrey's pulse quickened. "About what?" "About what you did," he said, "and what it cost you." He took a slow breath. "I'm opening a community center. Medical support, counseling, legal help. A place where people don't have to beg in the dark." Audrey's eyes narrowed slightly. Wary. "And, I need someone to run it," Nico said. "Someone who understands what it feels like to be invisible. Someone who doesn't flinch from truth." He paused, then added, "Softer. Someone like you." Audrey let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "I'm not qualified," she said automatically. Nico's gaze held hers. "You were the only qualified person in that cathedral." A small silence stretched. Wind moved through the roses, carrying a faint scent of earth and living things. Audrey's voice came out steady. "I'll do it," she said. "For the families. For the kids." Nico nodded once, gratitude flickering deep beneath his control. He simply stood there, letting the sunset soften the lines of his face. Tommy's voice cut across the yard, loud and impatient. "Are you two coming, or what?" Audrey's mouth lifted into a real smile. Nico turned toward the yard, then glanced back at her. "After you," he said. Audrey walked beside him through the gate, toward the boy with a ball, toward a life that smelled like fresh bread and soil instead of incense and poison. The truth didn't have a price tag. It only had a witness.